There's always something big in the news that triggers a wave of emotion, be it outrage, sympathy, calls for resignation, disembowelment, or what have you. Recently, and it changes so fast, it's over this guy, a journalist named Khashoggi.
The killing of Jamal Khashoggi was a premeditated murder.
Following the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Missing writer Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi consulate.
But then he was upstaged by the events in Ukraine.
The Russian Navy fired on 3 Ukrainian ships.
The Ukrainian Navy is accusing Russia of opening fire and taking 3 of its vessels.
Remember when it was kids in cages? Remember when it was Yemen? Remember when it was the Syrian refugees? Remember when it was Coney? Yeah, Pepperidge Farm remembers. To be fair, Khashoggi seems like he was a decent guy and a decent journalist. His apparent murder is by no means a positive event, no matter what his beliefs were. His murder has far-reaching implications, and dead journalists aren't ever a good thing. But can we be brutally honest here for a moment? Khashoggi is not the only journalist to be killed with such forethought and malice. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 20 reporters were murdered in Syria under Bashar al-Assad's regime. Some organizations estimate that up to 700 journalists were killed in combat or murdered in Syria during the conflict. So let me ask you a question that you won't like. Was Khashoggi the most recent journalist murdered by the Saudis or by any other state for that matter? If you're running to Google right now to find out, then you're rather making my point. Furthermore, 7 journalists in the safe EU have been murdered in the last 2 years, and many of them were investigating government corruption. I thought the EU was less of a cesspool than the Middle East, but perhaps I was mistaken. Were those 7 murdered journalists worth more coverage than Khashoggi? Maybe they were, but did you hear of them? Look at all of these issues, these events, these emotional triggers from Coney to Khashoggi, and riddle me this one thing. Why do you care? Think about it just for a moment. What's the mechanism for us caring about humanitarian issues at home or abroad? Or any kind of issues at all? Here's my answer: because the news told us to. Journalists are murdered all the time, so is Khashoggi special? Perhaps, and that his death warrants the opportunity to attack Donald Trump for not immediately nuking the Saudis for being chief suspects in his death, even though he was not an American citizen. Khashoggi's death was an intentional and evil event, but are there other Khashoggis dying in the world right now that are being ignored because their deaths don't provide a good political soapbox to point fingers at the other side? Khashoggi's murder provided the media with a confirmation story that proved just how persecuted they are, how they are martyrs and fearless crusaders for the truth, constantly under attack from bad people. But pardon me if I don't believe that Khashoggi's death is on the same level as getting mean tweets from Donald Trump. In my opinion, they ran with the story because it let them go after Trump. And if you can't pound the orange man bad with a story, then is it still a story? And many of the stories that have generated so much hand-wringing are still active stories. Syria is still an active war zone, as is Yemen. Coney is still free. Has the outrage continued with the event, or has the media moved on to something else? There are awful and terrible events happening even as I write this, as I record it, as I speak these words, and as you hear them. LiveLeak is loaded with high-definition footage of people being killed in combat and footage of the executions and the bodies in the aftermath. If you sit down at Google and try to find out the daily events country by country, you will find a torrent of horror, injustice, abuse, and so on, to the point that you can make yourself sick on a daily basis just observing what humans do to each other so that you can be fully informed and care about it. But we don't do that, do we? We wait for CNN or Fox or MSNBC to prepackage selected horrors into 4-minute segments, warm it up and serve it to us, and then we can care about it. But we can't care if we don't know, is the counter argument. Perhaps, but why are you trusting the media to pick which things you care about? Why are emotion and caring dependent upon a mainstream media sales pitch? It's not that the media should report every little event, but with the skyrocketing levels of bias and the push to establish a narrative, a story, or a viewpoint that pitches or sells a particular worldview, the question must be raised. If you only care about what the media tells you to care about, and when they tell you to care about it, how are you not acting like a sheep and just following along? How are you not being manipulated like a puppet by events and forces you do not fully understand, jumping up every time they dump an emotional trigger story in your lap just to pull your strings? The media is not presenting you with all the stories. They are presenting you with the stories that will drive revenue for their network, pay their bills, and push their narrative. The networks are giving you stories that are good business for them, and that's the goal. Incidentally, sometimes it's actually useful for you as well, and it's even decent journalism, but their starting point is not interest in your information, but in their own profitability. Their selective outrage is not reflective of reality, and it is not a good model to follow for your own outrage. The media's current role, their self-assigned job, is not to tell the truth. It's not to question the narrative of everyone, of every political side, although that should be their role in my opinion. Job number one for the media is to sell newspapers, clicks, shares, and views. There's no real conspiracy about the media in my mind, so if you have some JQ crap to peddle, do it somewhere else. All the media does is simply produce a product, and their goal is to have that product make money and push their agenda. And here's where it gets fun. The media learned what makes them money and what sells. Who do you think they learned that from? The consumer. You. Me. We told them which stories sell, and that's what they're selling. If CNN or Fox or anyone wants you to be outraged by a certain story, then it is very much worth questioning their narrative and looking for similar events that they have ignored either now or in the past. Doing this will likely make you more informed about the world around you and more aware of those who are purporting to tell you the truth. You might get some of your news from an outlet, and that's fine. I think we all do. Just don't get all your outrage cues from that outlet or the context for each story from those outlets. They're leaving stuff out that's not essential for their business, but it might be essential for your information. I think we should care about principles because those will guide us far better than just being mad every time CNN tells us to be. It is your principles that should cue your emotion, not the other way around. Your beliefs and your understanding of the context of an event, especially as it relates to similar events, are better standards for indignation than whatever is pouring out of your television. If we keep acting on media outrage triggers, then we are just showing that our easily manipulated emotions are what leads the way, and our beliefs and principles are simply captives following along behind.